After what happened to me all those years ago, the one place in the entire world that rattles my body and sends chills up my spine happens to be my grandmother's farm. When my parents and I visited my grandma's one-story cottage every 3 years, I was put in the same room. The room and all its velvet blankets and puffy pillows had a cozy vibe to it, along with the rest of the house. But at nighttime, the large window in front of the bed painted a picture of the unsettling wilderness outside, which didn't soothe my vibrant imagination. And ever since I was 6, my brain terrified me with that imagination using vivid nightmares, night terrors, sleep paralysis hallucinations, and everything in between. So naturally, my fear of the window was warranted. Most kids have monsters under their beds or in their closets. But at my grandma's house, my boogeyman lurked outside that window. The first time I ever saw it was at 2 in the morning, and my rapid hyperventilation was the only thing stopping me from squealing in panic. The creature, which I assumed was a figment of my imagination, was at the edge of the woods staring at the window. It was a goat standing on 2 legs, its body shape a furry caricature of a human's, and its claws dangling around its thighs. I slammed my eyes shut and shielded me with my soft blankets, waiting for the thing to evaporate from my imagination. As you can guess, I was dog-tired by the time I woke up. That morning, while my parents were at the town's Walmart, and I was trying to forget last night's experience, I had a pleasant and lighthearted conversation with Grandma. We loved to talk, and we had a special type of chemistry that transcended our generational differences. Curious about her farm, I wanted to know all about her animals. "Well, we have all sorts of animals," she said with a toothy grin. "I have chickens, peacocks, pheasants, mules, sheep, hogs, ducks, horses, ponies. I'll allow any animal on this farm besides goats." "Goats?" I asked, recalling the form outside my window. "Why don't you like goats? I mean, can't you milk them and make cheese?" Grandma's face darkened, and she stroked her fingers through her gray hair as her eyes stared into space. "Well, according to some people, after God created sheep, Satan, in an effort to desecrate God's sheep, created goats, an imperfect species. God, wrathful after Satan disgraced his sheep, created wolves to eat goats. In a massive tantrum of rage, the devil bit the tails off the goats, marking them as an unholy species." With a quizzical and hard-to-decipher face, she said, "I thought you would have seen it by now. Haven't you?" I knew what she was talking about in an instant, and it seemed I would burst into a fit of scared shrieking and crying at the thought of my grandmother confirming the thing outside my window was real. I tried to rationalize the situation, thinking the goat-like creature was just a dream and what my grandma said was unrelated. But at the sight of my distress, my grandmother destroyed that idea with the opening of her mouth. "It won't hurt you if you stay inside at night. There's nothing to worry about." It was supposed to be a comforting statement, but a double confirmation of one of my mythical boogeymen not being mythical shuddered me. Grandma pretended to forget the conversation, never speaking of it for the rest of the trip. That night, I decided to sleep in my parents' room, where the bed faced away from the window. But I swear I heard a glassy tapping from behind me. Luckily for my sanity, my parents and I left the farm the next day, leaving behind the rural forests and fields of Maryland. But 3 years after the initial incident, after blocking the creature from my memory, I saw it a second time at 11 at night. I'd been snoozing on Grandma's couch to the sound of the TV when a reporter shouting "breaking news" jolted me awake, my eyes initially darting around the room and my brain adjusting to consciousness. I gaped at the creature hunched over in front of the living room window. The half-goat sprang from the window and ran into the distance on its 2 legs. I slapped myself, saying, "Snap out of it, snap out of it." but nothing could stop the memories of the creature, and what my grandma said about it from hurtling out of the darkest pit of my mind. I paced around the room, with adrenaline flooding my arteries, wanting to flee but not knowing where to go. With a few sleeping pills, however, I willed myself to sleep with the living room curtains drawn. The morning after, I found a note on the kitchen table. My parents were shopping, and Grandma was at a doctor's appointment. I was alone in the house, and with undaunted intent to find out what was going on, I plugged in my grandmother's outdated Macintosh for a bit of research. "Half goats, half man," I typed, which brought up a Wikipedia page of satires and fawns. Not exactly what I was looking for. "Goat creature in Maryland," I corrected. And as soon as I searched that, Google presented me with another Wikipedia page. This one on a creature known as the Goatman of Maryland. This was precisely what I was looking for, and I proceeded to peruse the page. The Goatman of Maryland is a legendary half-goat, half-human creature that has the head and hindquarters of a goat and the body of a human. The page went on to explain how local Marylanders suspect the Goatman is either a failed gene-mixing science experiment or a demonic spawn of Satan, as Grandma insinuated. Getting worked up in the midst of my research, I had two primary suspects as to who created the creature: the Henry A. Wallace Beltsville Agricultural Research Center, which wasn't far from the farm, and the Satanic Temple, which had a goat person called the Baphomet as its symbol. However, I had to rule out both of these candidates, since the Beltsville Research Center never did any genetic experiments on goats, and the Satanic Temple was an atheist organization that didn't believe in Satan. This left me to continue wondering what the hell this thing was. For the rest of the week, I saw it every single night. While I tried to fall asleep in my room, it would be staggering around the clearing outside my window. If I were watching TV late at night, the Goatman would be gazing at the screen from the living room window. And on the last day, when I was feeding Grandma's peacocks in the evening, she came to bring me inside after she saw it approaching the farm. By the end of the second visit, seeing the Goatman was a usual occurrence. And with the occasional reminder from Grandma, I respected it and its personal space. 3 years later, however, my third visit to Grandma's ranch showed me what happened when you didn't honor the Goatman's boundaries. On the local news, there was one headline stirring up the rustic community: 10 professional boar hunters killed in animal attack. My parents thought it was horrible, but Grandma and I shot each other looks of shared knowledge. The next morning, the paper arrived at the farm, where the hunting tragedy made the front page. Yesterday evening, police found 10 renowned hunters, mutilated to death by a wild animal. The hunters' AR-15 magazines were completely full upon death, and local authorities are stumped as to how none of them could have gotten a shot off. My parents, who had no knowledge of the Goatman, had no idea what caused the attack, and were as ignorant as the confounded investigators. So I had to ask Grandma why my parents hadn't seen it yet. "Well," she said, "the creature only appears to those who interest it. It's apathetic towards some, including your parents, empathetic towards others, like it is with us. But it also shows antipathy towards particular people, such as those hunters who didn't respect its turf. You have to understand it can change its views on people. I have scars from when I was a girl, but after it got used to me, it stopped. My parents, who were your great-grandparents, were demoted to the low end of the thing's opinions. Their passing and my survival go to show how unpredictable it can be." I was shaking and, shall I say, more than freaked out by that. The thing had attacked Grandma when she was young, and it seemed like the Goatman could change its opinion of me in the blink of an eye. For all I knew, it swapped its views of people like a teenage girl changes clothes. It had seemed like I'd developed an affinity with the creature during my last visit by seeing it all the time and watching TV with it. And not once did I go outside in the night. When it was in charge of the farm, I'd respected it. Could it really forget all that? Or was I reading into Grandma's statements more than I should have? In the visits following that year, I read news articles about mutilated hikers, missing campers, and farm animals turning up dead. The Goatman was getting more aggressive. One time, the creature looked right into my soul with its black, empty eyes, and for the first time since my initial viewing of it, my body succumbed to unimaginable dread. The more violent the news stories became, the more my relationship with it deteriorated, and I could sense the same thing happening to Grandma. She was buying up more curtains for the house, acquired a better lock for the door, and went to a shooting range to learn how to use a shotgun. It came to the point where I tried to appease the creature by leaving pig food in the field for it to eat, but instead it snatched one of the hogs from the pig pen and ran into the woods. On the last day of that visit, I woke up to the sound of ear-splitting banging on the front door. Grandma was gripping her new shotgun, and with my dad holding a baseball bat, they waited for the intruder to burst through the door. Yet the banging subsided after a few minutes, the chirping and croaking of crickets and frogs replacing it within the hour. After that incident, we didn't visit the ranch for 5 years, and I was nearing the end of high school by then. My parents encouraged Grandma to move out of her house in light of people in her town being discovered murdered in their own homes. But being the stubborn Marylander she was, she decided against it. Besides, she thought she knew how fortified her cottage was. A few weeks ago, we returned to that awful farm, finding barbed wire strewn about the outskirts of the field. There were fewer animals than there was half a decade ago, and I swear some of the surviving pigs had faded scars on their bodies from scratches, stabs, and bites not even the most vicious bear could manage. I was more jittery than I'd ever been in my life, and that's not a hyperbole. I was jumpier than when I took the SAT, 10 times more jittery than I was when I asked my crush to prom, and feeling like a soldier going to war on a foreign continent. And it was all because I knew that Goatman was scheming someone in the deep woods, sensing my arrival on its territory. I spoke with Grandma, who showed me a newspaper talking about how the FBI was getting involved in the murder investigations in rural Maryland, and that the perpetrator would be behind bars soon. However, as Grandma told me, other farmers around town were speaking about how the FBI's true motive was to cover up the real culprit. I poked at my food during dinner, ignoring the discussion my family was having. Afterwards, I sauntered to my room and made sure the door was shut before I hopped into bed and waited. After hours of anticipating, in the field behind the window, the monster dragged the bloodied body of a peaceful doe into view. The Goatman ripped the deer's intestines out and gnawed at its insides with its death-loving fangs, spilling blood onto the moonlit ground. It turned its head to face my direction, hurling a piece of deer at the window. I jerked as blood splattered against the pane like a sheet of rain, startling me to full awareness. Me rushing from my bed to get a closer look at the field, I saw the Goatman had left behind the deer corpse. It was mocking me, and I was sure of it. I settled back to bed with the blood sliding down the window, wrapping myself in my blanket as if it was armor, and preparing for whatever might happen next. I have no idea how, but I drifted asleep with a piece of the creature's latest meal stuck to my window. That was when I had the worst nightmare any human mind could produce. It was a once-in-a-lifetime dream of horror, where the creature had crept into my room and was slicing chunks of muscle from my limbs, and carving blocks of my flesh out of my torso with its claws, chalking me with its horns. The pain was real, and I smelled the rotten stench of the creature's dirt-matted fur. It was as if my mind was nagging at me, and screaming at the top of its lungs for me to wake up. So I did. Soaked in sweat, I sent my eyes flying open, gasping like I drowned to near death. As I scrambled to see any sign of the Goatman's presence outside, I panicked upon seeing several inconsistencies with how the room was when I went to sleep. The door was wide open, and something had smeared deer blood on the inside of the window. and that's when the monotonous tapping reached my ears. Not from the window, but from my bed frame. 2 furry hands slumped over the frame, claws dripping blood onto the sheets. I froze, the form getting to its feet and tilting its head as it examined me. Too weak to fight and too shocked to run, I wanted to die. But to my surprise, instead of slashing my belly, the Goatman spoke. "You aren't ripe enough," it said, before crouching on all fours and scurrying out of the house. When the police arrived, they found the lifeless body of Grandma, who had died of a heart attack. After that, the FBI showed up, erasing all evidence of forced entry and the strange incidents of deer blood being inside the house. My sobbing and traumatized parents took us to a hotel, and I rejoiced at the fact that our room was on the 3rd floor. I shed a few tears and had a good rest, the thought of what the creature had said zipping through my mind. That was 2 weeks ago, and until now, I believed I would never have to see that farm for the rest of my life. But as it turns out, my grandma had left the farm to me. Not only that, she explicitly stated in her will that I should also inherit her shotgun. I don't want to go back there, but since she died, I feel a weighty guilt dragging me down. My heart desires for me to follow her last wishes, and they involve going back to Maryland with her gun. I'll try getting a priest to bless the farm, or an American Indian elder to perform a smudging ritual. Although I'm skeptical about those ideas working, I don't know when I'll have to return. I just know it has to be soon, or else plenty others will die.